Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by Protected Packaging Consultants, or PPC. The topic for this month is earth-friendly packaging materials. And we're so excited to bring this to you because one of our core values and part of our mission is to be able to reduce waste in the world and reduce the amount of CO2 emissions, the amount of waste going to landfills. And we wanted to dedicate an hour to just being able to quickly go over materials, what it means to be eco-friendly or sustainable, earth-friendly in the packaging world, and also devote some time to answering any questions you have in regards to becoming an earth-friendly packaging source, user, etc. I know we're getting started about 2 or 3 minutes late, so I want to make sure we delve into the materials as quickly as possible. So if you're joining, just you're probably on mute. I'll open it up for Q&A at the end. My apologies. And we will go ahead and get started. Just one moment, and I'll set up the slideshow. All right. So just to get started on the presentation, this is what we'll be going over today. Obviously, there are a lot of different people on the call right now. I think we had over 50 people respond with interest, so I'm really excited that we're able to share this information with you. But this is a more general topic so that we can benefit folks from every different industry, whether a manufacturer, an importer, a domestic packaging supplier, whoever you are. We want to make sure that we cover a wealth and breadth of knowledge as opposed to delving into a very specific niche part of the market. So I want to be able to provide everyone with some value, regardless of who you are. As a general introduction, my name is Danny or Daniela, and I work as the managing partner for Protected Packaging Consultants. I have a background in packaging engineering, data analytics, and operations management. I have worked in the e-commerce world for the past 7 years. So I'm really excited to bring this topic to you today. It's near and dear to my heart. What will we be talking today? So we'll be talking about general, like, what is sustainable packaging? What's the definition? What does it mean? And I think I'll offer you a slightly different view and a pro and con of that whole side of the topic. And then we'll talk about trends in the industry, sustainable materials as relate to fiber and non-fibrous materials. And then we'll finish with a summary and any questions that you have. So let's delve into what is sustainable packaging. So the definition of sustainable packaging, and this is from the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. You can read through this yourself. Obviously, this will be posted on our website, both the PDF presentation and the slideshow and this whole thing itself. So I'm really excited to give you more information here. But as a general overview, you have to look through the entire supply chain to determine whether something is sustainable, not just whether it's something that can be recycled or something that was produced with FSC certification. So it has to be, as the first line states, beneficial, safe, and healthy for individuals and communities throughout its life cycle. So some things, and this is up to you to define how far you want to go through the breadth of being a sustainable resource. You might consider where it's manufactured, the practices of manufacturing, the labor employed in manufacturing, how much CO2 emission is included or used for manufacturing, how much is used for shipment, how far is it traveling to get to whoever the user, the mid-user is, or the end user, meets market criteria for performance and cost. Obviously, if you are putting yourself out of business because you're so desperate to find a material that is biodegradable and it's not economically feasible for your business to use, that's not the definition of sustainable. Yeah, we can all work ourselves, out of business by only using the most effective and premier products without an idea of cost. So that's definitely not the idea of sustainable. Sustainable is a realistic concept for you and your business model. And again, it's up to you to define what sustainability truly means to you. Is it something that you're able to devote to, say, operationally, we're wasting less? As a domestic facility, we're pushing manufacturing to be more sustainable using raw materials or packaging, et cetera. But it also has to be able to work for you, your industry, and the market. For example, I worked with a client that was really interested in trying to use hay, watered hay, as their packaging material. And I love this idea, by the way. It's a great resource. Hay in general is great. It's able to take the shape of whatever you need it to. It's able to absorb impact. It's able to immobilize materials. So if you guys have joined any of the previous packaging seminars, you'll know that those are pretty instrumental aspects of a successful package and a successful packaging material. So when you're thinking about what it truly means to the customer, though, using hay, you have people who might be receiving this with severe hay allergies. You might have a potential for rodents or vermin to be nesting in the hay and then cause some havoc in the customer's home. Unfortunately, hay has not been developed to be a clean packaging method. So although it is definitely eco-friendly and earthly sustainable, that it's biodegradable, no harm going to landfill, etc., it's not the best customer experience, and in all aspects, it's not the right solution in terms of performance, although it may be on cost. To go through the rest of these bullets, source, manufacture, transport, and recycled with renewable energy. So that's, again, obviously you may not have a complete control over this, but this is something you can speak to your factories about and try to better understand where they're importing materials from or where they're sourcing from. Are they sourcing from packaging manufacturers that they have a good relationship with, but who may not be using the correct manufacturing methods for especially things like plastics? What do they do with the waste and byproducts? Is that something that they've considered in their supply chain? Is that something that's simply not benefiting the community and it's an additional drain for those types of toxins, especially with plastic manufacturing, or the offset, the waste and byproducts? Or is it something that they're potentially reselling so that it can be used in another industry? So there are always pros and cons in that concept. Obviously, for the rest of these, manufactured with clean production technologies, made from materials that are healthy throughout the life cycle, physically designed to optimize materials and energy. All of these, it has to coincide with what your product needs. If you are trying to use a material that isn't able to absorb impact on a very fragile piece of heavy glass, you may be using an eco-friendly and a quote-unquote sustainable material because that piece of cardboard or the really thin, whatever it is, material, it may have been sustainably sourced, but it's not effective for your product. It may be cost effective or really quick on the labor, but unfortunately it's just not going to keep your product out of the landfill. So it's always something to weigh in terms of effectiveness and potential for the later effects down the road, whether it's a customer experience, a damage concern, whether it's something that you may not be able to afford in the future as a business. So, and this is, the last piece of this is something I'm going to cover as well, is effectively recovered and utilized in a biological and or industrial closed loop cycle. So how this pertains to the home goods industry, for instance, is there is there a final end to the life cycle, or does the consumer know what to do with it? Is it a closed loop? Is it something that can be created to be reused? Is there a clean method of recycling, or is it simply going to landfill regardless of how it was manufactured or at what quantities it was shipped to the customer? So again, although in some circles, folks are extremely dedicated to fulfilling every one of these bullet points and checking each one of those boxes, we recognize that may not be able to be realistic for your business. So I want to give some just general information about how you can take steps in that direction, but we also recognize that going through and becoming a 100% sustainable packaging business overnight, it may not be possible. So these are companies that are looking at their packaging's funerals. And when I say funerals, it's like what happens after its final use, whether it does have a closed loop cycle or whether it's something that, you know, the consumer knows how to correctly get rid of it. It could be that simple. So with some of these folks, for instance, the majority are using their tertiary packaging all the way up to their primary packaging using sustainable materials. There are some companies, so the Ecologic containers, they're actually switching primarily from plastics to these, in some cases, plastic lined or at least in some way recyclable materials that are fiber-based. And because of that, they are able to, in some way, become more sustainable for the end consumer in this case. Their method of shipment to the stores, they're still having to ship these through the country. Their methods of manufacturing, although they're working on them, they understand that there are some potential hazardous waste products from the actual production. And so again, as I said before, they may not be checking every single box on the previous slide, but in this case, they're saying, my consumer understands how to correctly get rid of this in a sustainable manner. So there is, this is the most interesting part, and I'll focus my efforts on it. So the consumer is actually receiving information about what this packaging material is on the back label, but they're also being told how to recycle and compost it. So in this case, you can actually recycle the plastic liner, and then the fibrous material, the pulp on the outside, can either be recycled or even composted. So the consumer has a very simple and actionable method of keeping this life cycle and this funeral of the packaging to be a feasible, sustainable action. There are a number of case studies through here. IKEA is working on removing some of the foams from its packaging, but also creating their MDF boards with a more sustainable method in mind. Obviously with MDF, you have glues, you have different adhesives, you have the pulp to be able to create those boards, but actually looking at what goes into it, the manufacturing, even the chemicals, the hazardous breathing patterns for workers who are working with the production of MDF. That's something that they've started to take a look at, and so that's really apparent in and that's going to become more and more apparent in the home goods industry. So upon imports, like how much of your production negatively impacts either the consumer or the manufacturing staff and labor. And there's most likely the industry is headed towards an auditing world where you have to show exactly what steps you're taking to reduce these ill effects on your laborers or your consumers or post-consumers, the companies that potentially are going to come in contact with your products post-use or your packaging post-use. So these are just a couple of examples of brands that are working towards either consumer packaging, shipment packaging, or manufacturing protocols that are more sustainably oriented. So they're definitely out there. I want to make sure I leave enough time to go through and discuss all the different materials that are available. And part of this was included in the packaging materials webinar from a couple months back, but I wanted to bring this up again and spend a little bit more time going through each one of these options for those of you who are interested in potentially switching to another material. So for the next few minutes, I'm just going to go through and talk about the options on screen, but as a general caveat, there are many more materials being researched. There are variations on each one of these. For instance, the craft paper, it comes in a variety of methods. You can get stitched together double thick pages of craft paper. You can get machines that crumple it in certain ways. So there are variations on every single one of these materials out there. And I would say every year there are new materials that come out that may be using the same idea. They're all using a fiber, but they're built in a different way than the existing options are. So always keep your eyes and ears open. And a lot of these improvements, they come from the US, Canada, sometimes Mexico, sometimes Europe. And there aren't a whole lot of manufacturing opportunities when these are created for right off the bat in the Asian markets, although there are some companies that start there. But with a lot of the research that's going into sustainable packaging materials, it's being funded in non-Asian countries for the countries that have a little bit more of the legislation that's targeting environmentalism. And so especially in Scandinavian countries, some folks, some countries in Europe, There are a couple of universities that are trying to bring forward legislation to reduce the harmful effects of plastics, et cetera. And these are getting publicized in the U.S., in Europe, and in Canada. And the Asian market is potentially looking for these solutions, but it may not have been brought to their attention that these materials exist or that manufacturers are eager to start using them. And so right now, the packaging industry in Asian markets where the majority of products are still manufactured, a lot of that is still EPS foam, expanded polystyrene, polyethylenes, polyurethanes, polypropylenes for your bags, your foams, your foam corners, your cushions for your material or for your textiles, et cetera. A lot of that is still kind of using the old ways of, well, the cheapest manufactured material that is easily and readily accessible to each one of our factories is foam. Therefore, we should standardize foam as being our #1 recommended packaging material, and that's going to be our SOP. And it's that mentality that is going to prevent factories from going out and researching how they can begin importing or manufacturing new packaging materials. So it's up to you guys in your industries to work, especially if you're in an Asian market, for manufacturing, start introducing these concepts and say, hey, like this is a material that's easily accessible, or we're able to find it's manufactured in the US, but we're looking to potentially partner with you to either import this for our packaging, find a source for it to be manufactured in your province or an area close to you. And as long as you're going through and kind of whispering in their ear that you have an interest in something other than extremely low cost, low density, low quality EPS foam, in a lot of cases, that's going to start this process and get the ball rolling of being able to pull more of these eco-friendly materials into the Asian manufacturing market. So now that, I want to focus entirely on this slide. So for instance, one really great material is kraft paper. Kraft paper, if you simply fold it up, it's not really effective. You need to have it crumple. So for instance, if you're able to right now, if you crumple up a piece of paper, you'll find that it only crumples so far. And then each time that you let go of it, it'll rejuvenate, it'll uncrumple itself a tiny bit, and then you can crumple it up again and again and again. And yes, each time it might crumple a tiny bit further, but there is a definite end to its crumpling. You will never be able to flatten it to the thin, one-page thickness that it used to be as a flat page. Whereas if you fold it, you can get it pretty flat, and there's no real impact absorption there. So if you're using kraft paper, it's an excellent material, but you have to use it correctly. You have to create nests out of it. You have to create these bundles and crumpled balls of it, or use a piece of machinery that can. If you like recommendations on this type of machinery, we'd be happy to provide it for you. There are a number of companies in the U.S. that would be able to provide this machinery for domestic operation, especially if you're using this for repack or over-packaging concepts where you're getting case packs of something and you're breaking up like a set of 12, or you're mix and matching fine china, glasses, shot glass, whatever it is, whatever your material that you're currently using, maybe you can partner it with kraft paper to ensure that the kraft paper is providing some crumple zone, some immobilization value, and reduce the amount of foam or peanuts that you're using to be able to form and fit around your products. And so this is a really great opportunity for kind of mixing in a material just to reduce the usage of another. And this material, again, kraft paper is great. You can get it in multiple thicknesses. You can get it stitched together, crumpled with machinery. It can be really effective in terms of finding a flexible solution for a variety of products if you're shipping just a multitude of different SKUs. With molded pulp, moving on to the next one, molded pulp's a really interesting material. It is something that takes some tooling. You're going to have to probably pay for some machinery manufacturing so that you're able to create something that is precisely for your own product. So if you would like to, for instance, package different wine glass or wine wine bottle sizes, you will most likely need either a specialized or a custom tool to be able to make your molded pulp, or you need multiple sets of tooling for different, if you have wide variations in sizing. There are ways to make one tool for a variety of sizes, and we're happy to help with that, whether it's a cascading or waterfall concept, a diagonal versus a straight. There are definitely ways to be able to do that, and again, we're happy to help. But just keep in mind the upfront machinery costs, unlike craft paper, are very high. So you might be paying between $5,000 and $15,000 for a tool, so an actual die of the machinery that you'll need to use. And then the per unit on this is going to be more expensive than typically foam, if you're using like a really low quality cheap foam. That being said, this is a lot more customer friendly. It's something that can be used for a reverse logistics solution. It's also something that isn't going to fatigue over time if it's sitting in your warehouse. So foam is notorious for sinking and losing some of its height and its cushion just by sitting under weight. And pulp, and in this case molded pulp, is not going to do that as frequently or as easily just because of its density and the way that it's manufactured. So just things to remember with molded pulp: if you are using a molded pulp material, you want to make sure you have an adequate amount of crush zone. So if you create a piece of molded pulp that's the thickness, let's say it's a 1/4 inch thick, but it has no ridges or grooves that are able to crush, kind of like the front end of a car, it's very similar to just putting a very thin but hard knee pad on your knees and then falling on them. They will still have an amount of impact that's a huge amount of impact that's going to be translated into your product or into your knees in some cases. And so cosmetically they're going to protect it, but impact-wise, the force is just going to go straight through because it didn't have those grooves, those peaks and valleys to crush through. So you definitely do want to create, similar to this, what's in this photo, you want to create a series of pockets that air and the molded pulp material can crush into if there's a huge impact. And that's what's going to prevent that impact from being transmitted straight into the product itself. So you can see that here as well. You're able to hold the product in place but still have a lot of those crush zones. Again, if you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box. We can take them afterwards. I just want to make sure we get through all of the different materials here because I have this slide and another slide of materials, and I think that's what y'all really came for, is trying to see what options you have to be able to bring them into your business to surround your products. So on to the next one. Next is honeycomb. So this material, again, we featured it in our packaging materials webinar a few months ago. Honeycomb is amazing. It's very similar to, it's like a mix between craft paper, molded pulp, and cardboard. It provides the honeycomb cells, as you'd call them, to both be able to crush, similar to molded pulp, have little crush zones, but also they are able to take the shape of whatever products you needed to in a certain way. And I'll talk about kind of shaping this in a second. So you have the cells that are able to crush, and they're also filled with air. So it's a very light material. You're able to get in different thicknesses, different densities, depending on how far or close together the cells, the honeycomb cells are. Because they're filled with air, there's a huge amount of impact that can be distributed and dispersed through the air before it even passes through the material. And so this is a really great solution for heavier things, products like tile, bathroom vanities, car engines, you name it. If it's dense, heavy, and large, this is a great solution for you. It is not as widely manufactured in Asia as it is in the US, Mexican, and European markets. And so if you're manufacturing in South America, you may want to import a good quality or a large amount of honeycomb from countries like Mexico and Brazil that have paper-based packaging operations. There's a few in Guatemala, but that being said, it depends on where your factory is and whether you have, whether packaging sources around that factory are able to accommodate whatever volumes you need them to. So there's just a large amount of just sheer quantities of packaging honeycomb material manufacturers in Mexico and in Brazil based on their logging industries for paper. So it's just something to throw out there in terms of where you could source this material from. It's also readily available in the U.S. In terms of shaping this to your product, so you think like these are just pieces, they're straight pieces, and in fact you can actually manipulate honeycomb. You can make double stacked honeycomb, you can get in different thicknesses, you can cut pieces out so that they create holding sites for your product, so that you can insert the product into the honeycomb so it's immobilized. You can also split score honeycomb, which is cutting through only a half, like one side of the material, so that it's able to fold on a hinge. And that way you can go around edges and corners and potentially create a curvature or curve, a fold to the honeycomb in a really low cost manner. So you don't have to create or glue together two pieces to make a corner. It's pretty simple to just make a hinge. So honeycomb in a material, as I said before, because of its fluting, so every one of these cells, it's fluted in a certain direction. So material is strong if you stand on honeycomb flat. So you stand on the paper bases that hold it together. But if you turn it on its side, it loses pretty much all of its strength because it's fluted in only one direction. So it's just something to think about in terms of whether it's an effective use. If you have a product that, or if you have a packaging strategy that requires you to have products stacked in multiple directions, or it has to be able to be flipped and stacked upon, just watch out what orientation you're putting that honeycomb into, because if you turn the box and expect the honeycomb to be able to hold the product's weight when the whole thing is on its side or turn at a 90-degree angle, your honeycomb might end up getting crushed because it's not being oriented for strength the right way. Very similar to a box. Moving on to the next solution. So this is one. So just wanted to take a brief pause and just talk through a lot of the similarities with the first three products are that they have crush zones, and we're going into a product that may not necessarily have very good crush zones. And so I just wanted to point that out. When we're talking about folded corrugate structures, it's literally folding cardboard or a paper material. And this is great at protecting another material. So something I talked about with craft paper and something you can do with any packaging material is pair it with another. So whereas before you could be using just foam, you could potentially go to a spot or to a place in the product's life cycle where you are using foam around the corners or around the legs, and then you're using honeycomb somewhere else. To make foam more effective, you might want to consider lining it with these corrugate corners or some sort of insert to protect the foam from its from the products that it's supposed to be protecting, especially if they have sharp edges, corners, really pokey parts. So this is something where by pairing two materials together, you end up reducing waste in your supply chain because their products aren't getting damaged. So this is kind of one of those, does it make more sense to try and find a totally separate packaging material or switch to honeycomb where I don't have access to it and it's a real hardship for me in trying to import this into my country of manufacturing? Or do you say, I'm going to stick with the materials I have and make them much more effective so as to prevent damaged product from going to landfill? I'm happy to work with you however you need to be able to prevent damages here. And I think that going through product by product to determine if each product needs that amount of whatever packaging material you're using, if it's foam, is it stretch wrap, is it bubble, does it need those materials? And if it were paired with a secondary material, would those materials be more effective together? Would you be able to reduce the amount of non-sustainable, non-eco-friendly materials because you're using this pairing? And overall, are you able to reduce potentially the cube of your shipment because you're making your packaging solution more effective over a smaller amount of space or amount of height, whatever your solution is. So if you're currently using a giant foam block to put your chairs on, maybe we use a box instead. And maybe because the box is way more effective at holding the weight of your product, we don't need a 3-inch gap between the chair legs and the floor. We could make it 2 inches or 1.5 inches and reduce the height of your shipment. So just some ideas there. I'm going to move to the next product because there's a whole world of folded corrugate contraptions, whether it's a different mailing envelope, something to be able to hold frames in place, like you name it, corrugate has been used to produce it. So if there's a product that you're interested in saying, hey, could this be a potential solution for my stuff, where we're using a corrugate solution as opposed to a foam-based one, how do we use corrugate? Is it effective? My product has these dimensions, this weight, et cetera. These are the problems I'm seeing. We can definitely let you know we would or wouldn't recommend corrugate and in what way. So moving on to the next one, Geomi Wrap. So this is a specific product, and it's currently provided by a couple of distributors. It's a really interesting concept because it's able to interlock craft paper that has been, so this material that we already talked about with tissue paper, to create a really effective packaging solution that interlocks with every layer of itself because of the way that it's crinkle cut. And it's really great for flexible material. So if you're shipping a mug with plate, and normally you'd create like a separate foam mold, or you'd use foam in place, peanuts, whatever it is, you could switch to this material, and it's great for if you have multiple things that are shipping in the same carton, different sizes, and you have the ability to wrap each one separately. This is a kicker, separately from one another. So if you have questions about this or would like a source, they do samples. I'd be happy to forward you some contact information. Again, if you ship small light products like small accent decorations, wall art, that sort of thing, happy to determine whether this might be a good solution for you. Moving on to the next ones. So this is Expandos. It's a type of material. They're little corrugate triangles that are manufactured on site as you need them. Again, this is a great flexible solution for you have thousands of SKUs in your warehouse and you need to find one solution that fits them all. This is a great one, especially if they're heavy. Expandos come in a variety of densities, and they're able to take the shape of and fill whatever area you need them to. So happy to put you in touch with this vendor if you're interested, and we are able to make recommendations on how to effectively use Expandos. So for instance, if you're already bringing in a product pre-packed, but the packaging isn't quite making it to the customer without that product getting damaged. So it's a vase, it doesn't have as much packaging internally as it needs to, but you don't actually want to take that vase out of the packaging. We can find a solution that incorporates Expandos or any of these other options for materials and find something that fits in within what you're capable of doing, what is realistic to do for that product, and ultimately what that product needs to get to your damage threshold. Corrugate pads, moving on to this next one. So corrugate pads are a great immobilization impact protection tool. So this is very similar to honeycomb. It effectively takes whatever shape a foam pad would take. So if you have foam corners, L-shaped protectors, etc., this can be manufactured to replicate what the foam is doing in the same shape, except it's way more effective because it doesn't split apart. It is able to hold its shape a lot longer over time, and it doesn't crush as easily. Especially for heavy products, this is an excellent solution. And if you're interested, there are ways to make this yourself. If you are bringing in a load of case pack materials and you have a lot of boxes left over, there are ways to create corrugate pads in your own facility and reuse some of that wasted product that you would probably send to recycling or to landfill anyway. So I did want to talk about this last photo because I realized I skipped over it and I shouldn't have, but this is part of the corrugate folded structures that I wanted to show you. So not just corners or thin, sharp item protectors. You're able to use corrugate in so many different ways. And this is a spring-like structure that creates a pocket for your product and some impact absorption, or kind of a trampoline effect that works really well to be able to absorb impact. And so being able to use this, for instance, if you have a heavy product and you know that if it gets dropped on 2 of the 4 sides, it's destined to get damaged. So for instance, a box of tile, if you drop it on the corners, it might survive. There's a lot of foam there. But dropping it on the top or bottom, where all of that weight is hitting into the center of a stone tile where it's the most fragile, and it shouldn't absorb impact that way. This is a great spot to be able to say, okay, I'm going to keep the foam on 4 sides or on all the corners, but to make sure I keep this brick of stone tiling or tiles in the center of this box, I'm going to use a corrugate spring structure and keep it blocked and braced into the center of the shipping carton. So again, just an example, there are probably thousands of ways of creating a corrugate structure that works with your product, whether it's the primary packaging, secondary packaging, etc. And it's a really beneficial tool to keep in your tool belt. So I'm going to move to the next slide. And these are just fun ideas with fiber. This I want to just talk through showing you what I was talking about before. So this is a corrugate pad that has had its pieces cut out like a mold, and it, just like a foam mold, fits onto itself like a male-female part, or in this case, you have this faucet that fits into its own space, and then you're able to include hardware if you need to and immobilize that. You have a great amount of space between the product and its shipping carton. It can't move. It's not going to get damaged because the corrugate is not abrasive for this type of material. And you don't need foam at all, so it's a pretty fun one. This is how you flip score honeycomb. As you can see, you can make it shaped and to go around corners, to potentially, if you have a lopsided corner that's deeper than it is, deeper on one side than it is on the other, you're able to adjust the thickness of your honeycomb by flip scoring it. In this case, this is a corrugate structure. So these are examples of that corrugate structure where a piece of, say, furniture, if you're selling laminate, vinyl, whatever it is, you're creating a crush zone that's filled with air so as to be able to disperse impact throughout that entire area, in this case both of these ends, move the product's corner away from the actual box corner, so if it hits on that corner, it's hitting this perfect little corrugate pad, or corrugate structure, I should say. And it's going to immobilize the product as well because you're shoving it right between these two pieces of corrugate that are going to be able to hold it in place. So again, great solution here. These stacked photos on the right, this is, you know, a great solution for something that's extremely low labor intensity and really high effectiveness for impact protection, for being able to put that product on that end without the foam, if there were foam, being crushed by the weight of that product. All right, I'll move on to the next one. So I think you're seeing that I really love that particular contraption. So this is another version of a corrugate built-up pad. They've interlocked these. You can do the same thing with honeycomb so as to create perfect corners for this machine. Obviously, you have a really high thickness here, so the thickness isn't something that prevents you from using a fibrous material. And you're able to shape it into a corner. Look at that. So I love that. I think that product's probably not going to get damaged at all. In using that and looking at that data, you're able to see if you're tracking when you make a change from one material to the other, you'll just see what the impact is. No pun intended there, but you'll be able to see how much the material that you're changing your strategy to, your packaging strategy, has had a positive impact or positive or negative impact on the damage rates for your item. And in this case, if I remember correctly, this was something that, reading the case study, it went from like 10 or 12% down to less than a percentage point in damage. So really effective there at absorbing impact because of the way that it's built and the material it's built from. And then here, I know this is something that affects, you know, the LTL full truckload industries. This is a honeycomb cover pad so as to be able to create a smooth and even surface if you're stacking pallets potentially in your own warehouse, if you are worried that something will fall on top of your pallet of product and damage it, instead of just using a piece of corrugate, you can use honeycomb, and it acts both as an impact absorber, as a load spreader, as a strap protector, that your straps aren't going to be cutting into the product itself and garroting it. So that one to me is just like this all-in-one solution for a good palletization solution. And you can also put it underneath the product, not just on top. Great. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And these are options for non-fibrous materials. And so I do want to talk through, in the N1 you'll actually say, hey, that looks like foam. But I do want to talk about potentially still using the materials you have just in a smarter or more efficient way. And of course, with all this, like, we're happy to help however we can to guide you there. So these are these peanuts, and I apologize, this is supposed to be starch peanuts, and I'll fix that in the PDF before I post it. But starch peanuts, this is a great method of using a flexible solution that fits around any size product. But if it goes to landfill, if it goes into the garden, if it goes into the trash, it just can't be recycled. But it is made of it's made of starch, so it's water-based, or it's water degradable, so to speak. And it'll melt. It'll create this mushy, not really looks like anything substance that you can just flush down the drain if you want to, or throw it outside. It's not going to harm anything. So it's a great tool for being able to ship, as I said before, a variety of different sizes of product. But in this case, just keep in mind with the customer experience side of things, it's still peanuts. Like, it's still going to go everywhere and make a mess. They're going to have to dig through the peanuts to get to the product. So in terms of a customer experience side, it's still a sustainable solution, but it may not be a customer-friendly one. Moving on to the next one. So this is a really interesting one. I'm going to talk about mushroom foam next, and we're just going to go across and then down to the bottom. So, and this one is going to have hay in it because I'm now very intrigued by the concept of using hay for almost anything and seeing how it can be done. So mushroom foam is actual fungus that has been grown into a mold shape and then killed off using heat. And it looks like molded foam. It acts very similar to molded foam, and it has very great high-density impact-absorbing qualities. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to manufacture, so it does take potentially days or weeks of growing the mushroom into its shape. And depending on how humid it is and the warmth, etc., this is typically not done en masse. It's typically done for really high-margin small items. If you were trying to package a 72-inch TV stand in this, you're probably not going to be able to find a manufacturer for foam parts that size. There are, in speaking about this, I figure I'd touch on the same subject. There are other companies that are currently using mushroom-related foams. So, for instance, mushroom growth around corn husks to create a pad. So you're able to create higher volumes without the whole thing being one fungal growth. And they still absorb impact. They're still high density. They're high quality material. They're very expensive, unfortunately, very expensive. So hopefully the industry is moving into this direction where we can grow our own packaging. But until we get there, this is ideal for use around really small, fragile, valuable items. Probably not the best solution for extremely large car motors. Moving on to this next one, it's very similar. They're green cell foams that are more sustainable because they can more easily be recycled. They usually are, and if you would like recommendations on where to source this, they're available in larger pads, but their densities can be harder to come by just because of their manufacturing method. So this is something, again, very similar to the mushroom foam, probably better for smaller items as opposed to your extremely large book stand or bookshelves or TV stands. Just based on the sheer price of this, basically use it for small items. And if you're able to find a manufacturer of this that's close to you, make sure that you test your items first and make sure they're the right density of green cell foam. Really high density material is a little harder to come by because it's harder to manufacture because you have to fit a lot more of these cells into the same space. And so for some materials, it's a little harder to manufacture that. I do want to touch on potentially using second-use foam. So for a lot of industries, whether it is textiles or manufacturing upholstered items, seating, they have a lot of byproducts, especially when they're cutting things to shape, even for industries like shoe wear, for sneakers. Like they're using foams in the bottom of your sneakers, and most likely they're cutting that foam to shape, and the rest of that cutting is going somewhere. And so depending on what type of product that you have, it is possible to use something that would go to landfill right away and give it one more life cycle. Granted, this isn't the most sustainable approach, but it is definitely, it checks a couple of boxes on the list. And because it's a waste or a byproduct of the manufacturing, it's going to be less expensive than going through and, let's say, growing your own mushroom foam. So it's just an interesting idea. A lot of times, though, you have to watch out because these foams, either they're a mix of different densities or they're a polyurethane or a polypropylene that's a lower density, unfortunately. So you want to make sure that you're not just finding a second use or a eco-friendly solution at the expense of damaging your products because you haven't chosen the right density or the right thickness of material. So again, if you're looking at potentially switching materials, let us know, let us help, because we don't want your damage rate to go up just because you switch materials. So moving on to the next one, and this is a similar segue, talking about this aerosol foam. So this is a mix of EPS and PE foam, and it's a much higher quality material than EPS or styrofoam. It definitely absorbs quick impact, but it doesn't fatigue as quickly, especially under pressure or weight. And so this is a great solution. If you're looking for something that's clean, you have a really high quality item that's really large. Aerosol corners, aerosol pads they take the exact same shape as your existing EPS foam pads would. This adds a little bit of strength to them. So this is, and hopefully I'm not repeating myself too many times, again, you don't want to switch packaging material to something that won't work for your item. So if your options are switch from foam to something that's questionable that you don't know will work for the shape and weight of your item, versus finding something that you might be able to use that's able to be more of a thin pad as opposed to an entire foam sheet covering your product on all 6 sides, maybe you can go to corners instead of a coffin of foam. There's a lot of different strategies as how to reduce the amount of foam you're using, and maybe it's by changing to a slightly higher quality foam that is able to use. In this case, they do have a recycling program for EPS, so if you send them your styrofoam, they're able to induct that and make new foam out of that because they're mixing it with this higher quality polyethylene foam. So it's just an idea in terms of being able to use a second use or wasted item that would have generally gone to landfill before, and maybe use that in the same way as you would in the same shape as your existing materials. Moving on, so this is an interesting one, biodegradable stretch film and other films. It's recently come out onto the market that this is available en masse. That being said, it's a derivative with palm oil, and palm oil may or may not be, depending on what you look at, the sustainability for manufacturing palm oil and palm oil forests. It may not be the best material or the best additive. I'm sure that it's great, like you're able to literally put this stretch film on the ground and it degrades over several, I think it's about 100 years as opposed to a half-life of like 500,000 years for regular plastics, for like polyethylenes. But in the same scope, one of the bullets was, is this manufactured, is this the supply chain of how you're making this packaging material sustainable? And in this case, it's up to you to decide if palm oil farming is something that you define as sustainable or not. The next one, hay pads. So we already talked about hay for a little while, but it is an interesting concept. Probably not something that can be used in the home goods industry, especially since it's not a typical packaging material that a customer would be expecting. And as I said before, if that customer has a hay allergy or there are critters living in there in the hay and it's shipped to the customer and all of a sudden there's an infestation, probably not the most exciting solution. But that being said, if you're shipping eggs like this guy, or you are just selling them to customers in person, it's an interesting concept. They already know they're getting it packaged in hay. They might like it. Similarly, you can use, there are suppliers that try to use corn husks, use shredded old corrugate. I mean, there's a variety of things that are very similarly shaped where it's a byproduct of something else, and it's used effectively. So again, if you're interested in picking our brain, if you're looking at, hey, can I use hay for my product or shredded corrugate or whatnot, let's talk about it, because we certainly, again, don't want your damage rate to go up because you haven't protected a critical area of your product in the right way. The last part I want to mention is having the ability to use minimalist foam. So this is what I alluded to earlier, is can you use just a smaller amount of foam of your existing packaging material? There are many products that you literally have a foam sheet on every 6 sides, or all of the 6 sides on every side of the product, and instead you could get away with having, in this case, they're adhesive foam pads. And if you're looking at this and thinking, I love this, let me know. I can connect you with the manufacturer who invented this and holds the copyright for it. But if you're able to go through and create a smaller use of the materials at hand, like, it's still, that's moving towards the right sustainability pattern. Maybe you're not able to move away from foam yet because it's not economically feasible. Let's find a way to use foam in a more effective manner for your business. So here are some tough questions I want to make sure that we go through and talk about with the last few minutes of this presentation. So these are the big questions, and I'm sure that you guys can go through and answer these internally if you're switching materials. So, and we already alluded to talking and have spoken about some of these. So 1, is waste being created elsewhere? As I said before, is switching out materials going to impact or negatively impact another part of your supply chain, like customer experience, like the hay fiasco? Is it going to impact other parts of the supply chain? So if all of a sudden you decide that you're going to import Arcel from a different province in China, you're going to increase your transportation and your transportation costs and your shipping CO2 emissions. And so there's a trade-off there to figuring out, okay, I have to pay more, I have to ship it farther. In some cases, it's not always. Sometimes you'll find a factory's right next door. But in some cases, again, is it negatively impacting another part of the supply chain? Question number 2, is your supply chain ready for this change? If you are not able to source that material close to you, as in the previous example, if you have a labor team that isn't trained or skilled in being able to pack something the right way, if you need machinery or if you need systems or tracking or being able to analyze data and you haven't had that system and solution before, that's a huge change for your organization. And that's something that we can help you work through as you implement that change. And having a change management system may be the right way to approach this. You might have to pay a little bit more to either build that machinery or be able to install it in the right facilities. So is your supply chain ready? You have to look at all the different moving parts to it. Will customers know what to do with the change? That's the last question I have on there. There are obviously many other questions in regards to switching to a material, but in this case, for specifically on a customer experience side of things, if you're going to be switching to a material that is going to dazzle them, that's amazing. Like, if you change their unpacking experience for the better, and they receive something where they're like, this is simple, frustration-free. Let's say you're going from foam peanuts to molded pulp, and it's just opening 2 little pieces of pulp instead of digging through a whole box of peanuts. Phenomenal. But does your customer know whether they can put that molded pulp packaging into recycling or the trash? Like, is it adequately marked? Moreover, are you letting your customers know that you are valuing and you are putting the mission of having a sustainable package or sustainable supply chain first? That's a great branding and a competitive strategy that if you're able to advertise that fact that, hey, our frustration-free packaging, as Amazon would like to call theirs, is also sustainable and all 100% of it can be recycled or composted, that's becoming more and more of an interest for customers. So it's something that, as a company, you need to decide, like, if this is part of our strategy and goals and vision and mission, let's let our customers know. And in that case, they need to know exactly how to deal with their funeral the funeral of their packaging. Otherwise, all your efforts may have been in vain. And that change that you made, that you invested in and trained your people on and gone through and evaluated your entire supply chain to determine that's the most sustainable approach for that change, it's not going to bring value back to your company. So just make sure there, again, make sure customers understand how the change is going to affect them and you. So with that being said, I will open it up for questions. This will be the end of the recording, so feel free to send me any questions you have. We're right at an hour, so really appreciate all of you joining. And for those of you who might rewatch this in the future, if you're watching this once it's posted, thank you so much. I hope that you've received some benefit and some more information about using materials, either new materials by on their own or as a pair with something else. As always, feel free to contact us. Our email is propackconsult@gmail.com. You can check us out at www.propackconsult.com. All of our webinars will be posted online in our resources. And look out for the next webinar for the month of May. It's going to be in regards to simulated laboratory testing. So for those of you who are interested in ISTA testing, if you're interested in creating your own testing lab, please join us for that because it'll be filled with great information. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.